Hardcore towers are some of the most powerful towers you can get, having unique abilities, mechanics, and insane levels of DPS. There's a total of 4 hardcore towers, and unfortunately they all cost gems and are very expensive. So in this video, I'm going to be looking at the stats, values, uses, and capabilities of each of these towers that give my personal ranking of how good they are on a tier list. So hit that like button and subscribe, and let's get started. For our first tower, we have the newly added Brawler. It costs 1,250 gems in the shop and is a melee tower that attacks using his fists. At later levels, it stuns enemies and has a powerful relocation ability. It costs 450 cash to place, meaning you can get it on the first wave. At level 0, it has a DPS of 8.28, giving it a value of 18.4 DPS per 1k spent. That is ridiculously good. In comparison, the Golden Scout only has a value of 8.3. A level 0 Brawler by itself can last until wave 3 in follow mode, which is kinda mid. But if you get 2 of them, they can defend up until wave 9, only leaking a little HP on wave 7. That's incredible, and there aren't a lot of towers that can do that for only 900 cash total. After level 2, it now performs a 3-hit combo, with the final punch dealing extra damage and most importantly, knocking the enemy backwards. While each enemy does have a personal cooldown with how often they can be knocked back, this is an extremely powerful support and is able to permanently stall slow enemies. At level 4, it gains the reposition ability, which lets you target any spot on the map, which the Brawler would jump to, creating a shockwave upon landing. It can be used every 60 seconds, dealing 100 damage and stunning enemies. At max level, for a total of 25,650 cash, it attacks much faster and has a DPS of 186.22. That's a really high max DPS, and this combined with its stalling capabilities makes it a fantastic boss killer. Things like the tank will be destroyed by the Brawler as it pushes it back, countering its fast speed and beats the hell out of it. Also, at level 5, the ability now deals 200 damage, allowing it to be a powerful option against crowds of enemies. It also has a placement limit of 10, meaning the max DPS you can get is 1,862.2. So not only is this tower a great form of support, it's a great choice in the late game. And while it isn't as good value at max level, being 7.43, that's still fantastic. Because of its cheap price, it's really good at transitioning from early to mid to late game, allowing it to be effectively used the entire match. It has great coverage too, being able to attack hidden and lead enemies and damage flying ones using its ability. But its ability isn't just good because it stuns and damages crowds. It allows the Brawler to track down enemies without having to be sold and replaced. This is a common issue for other melee towers who in the late game need to be repurchased constantly once the boss has walked out of range. This ends up wasting a lot of money that could have been spent on additional defense. That's not a problem for the Brawler, who can move to any spot on the map every 60 seconds. This makes it a lot better as an option against final bosses, as you'll be able to save a lot of cash. Overall, the Brawler is a fantastic tower, providing amazing support, high DPS, having a powerful ability, and all for a cheap price. This tower gets an S+ ranking from me, simply because of how incredibly versatile it is. There really isn't anything this tower can't do. Next up, we got the Necromancer. It costs 1,800 gems in the shop and attacks using a magic staff, placing tombstones after dealing a certain amount of damage. When activating its ability, these graves break and transform into various skeleton units. It costs 1,650 cash to place, so you can't get it in the early game. And even if you could, every level before max level is horrible. For example, let's take a look at level 3, analyzing both its main attack and graves. It costs a total of 15,000 cash, and its main attack deals 24.8 DPS. It can hit up to 3 enemies at a time, which usually doesn't happen unless it's placed in front of a straight path. This gives it a value of 1.65 DPS per 1k spent, which is terrible. But hey, maybe the graves can save it. At this level, it is able to place a maximum of 7 graves, which can spawn 250 health skeleton giants or 100 health skeleton knights, which can also deal 35 damage every 0.658 seconds with their sword. Since the skeletons are randomized, let's just say the graves will spawn 3 giants and 4 knights. Combining the health, and if we assume the skeletons get to attack once, that'll be a combined 1,290 damage. This sounds pretty good, but not only does the Necromancer stop attacking when using the ability, it takes forever to rebuild them thanks to its low DPS. But everything changes once you get it to max level for a total of 43,500 cash. It now attacks with continuous beams, being able to target up to 7 enemies at a time, dealing 64.94 DPS. In total, that's 454.58 DPS. And because of its pretty impressive range, this is basically guaranteed. That gives it a value of 10.45, which is incredible and probably the best value I've seen for any tower with such a consistently high DPS. It also has some great coverage, being able to attack hidden and flying enemies and damage lead enemies using its skeletons. But not only does its main attack get significantly stronger, its graves are also much better. At this level, they now explode upon activation, dealing 300 splash damage. If we use that over a crowd, and we assume that each of the 7 graves hit at least 2 enemies, that's a whopping 4,200 damage just from the explosions. On top of exploding, they also spawn much stronger skeletons, being the 1250 hollow guards, the 3500 health executioner skeleton, which can throw a boomerang axe dealing 50 damage to each enemy hit, and the same skeleton knights. While all the graves spawned are random, the executioner skeleton seems extra rare. So let's assume 7 graves spawn only 1 executioner, 3 hollow guards, and 3 skeleton knights. If all the knights could attack once, we get a total of 7550 damage from the skeletons. Adding that to the explosion damage, we get an insane total of 11,750 damage upon activating this ability. That is an insane nuke and can be extremely helpful on difficult waves that you happen to be struggling on. But you gotta make sure you're careful when using this ability. Upon activating, the Necromancer stops attacking for a few seconds. Then, since it has really high DPS and only needs 30 damage to place a new grave, it will back after back replace all 7, making it stop for even longer. In total, you can expect the Necromancer to not attack for another 4 to 5 seconds after using its ability. That could be a big deal considering how powerful its main attack is. So just make sure there isn't something deadly coming up the next wave, or just don't fully rely on the Necromancer for your DPS. There's also another problem, being that this tower only has a small placement limit of 3. While that isn't a lot, you can still get a max DPS of 1363.74, so it doesn't really kill the Necromancer. It can dish out some serious damage while having incredible value. The ability can also be really helpful as long as you know how to use it, but the fact that it's only good at max level and every level before that is horrible really holds the tower back. Basically, you only want to place it down if you have enough cash to instantly max it out, otherwise it's just a waste of space and money. If every level was like max level, then it would be an easy S tier, but since every level before max level is arguably D tier, this tower lands a spot in B tier. Next up, we got the Accelerator.
But before we move on,
I have some exciting news, being that in collaboration with Makeshift, the CORSO plushie is now real. It's currently in the petition phase, and early supporters will be given special rewards. The first 200 supporters will get an exclusive golden plushie roll in my Discord, and any purchases after that will also receive a plushie roll, just not as golden and cool. There's a link to buy it in the description, and we need at least 200 pledges for it to actually start producing, so any support is greatly appreciated. Essentially, it costs $2 to pledge, but later you will be charged a full $30 if the petition is successful. Otherwise, you'll get a full refund of your pledge. The petition will only last 10 days, so make sure you don't miss out. Anyways, let's get back to the video. It costs 2,500 gems and attacks using a plasma gun, which has to charge up before being able to attack. It shoots out a continuous beam, but once its overheat meter has filled up, it has to cool down and recharge before attacking again. It costs 4,250 cash to place, so it's only good in the mid to late game. At max level, for a total of 53,700 cash, it deals an insane 284.81 DPS when accounting for its charge and cooldown. The actual beam itself deals 416.67 DPS. That's crazy, being some of the highest raw DPS in the entire game. It has a value of 5.13 DPS per 1k spent, which is pretty solid. Max level also happens to be the level with the best value, which is really convenient. On top of that, it can also attack lead enemies from base level and hidden enemies once you upgrade it to level 1. So it can pretty easily shred anything that's in front of it as long as they aren't flying. Also, it has a placement limit of 8, meaning the max DPS you can get using the accelerators is 2,278.48, which is insane. With that said, it does have some downsides. First of all, its attack isn't super consistent. Because it has to charge up before firing and goes into cooldown after dealing a certain amount of damage, it's pretty unreliable, and fast enemies can slip past it while it's not shooting. Fortunately, since you can place 8 of them, it's uncommon for all of them to stop attacking at the same time. But it has yet another problem with its attack, being that it locks onto enemies until they die or leave its range. If you're facing a final boss that the accelerator can't cook in a matter of seconds, the enemies it summon might just sneak past your defenses. However, I'd say an even more significant issue is the fact that it can't fully benefit from support towers due to its overheating mechanic. Things that make it deal more DPS, such as the 50% fire rate buff from the commander and the 20% buff from the mercenary base, also cause it to go into cooldown faster. This means that instead of 8 excels getting an extra 1,822.78 DPS from support towers for a total of 4,101.26 DPS, they only get an additional 994.24 DPS for a total of 3,272.72. That's a significant difference. But since the accelerator is already so powerful, this isn't enough of an issue to stop it from being amazing. Its value and DPS plus good coverage and placement limit completely make up for it. It's a more simple tower, kind of just dealing a ton of DPS without too many complicated mechanics. I'm gonna put it in S+ because it's ridiculously strong, but I'm gonna rank it below the Brawler. The Brawler just has way better value, provides amazing support, and dishes out some crazy DPS, so overall I'd say it's better. Last, but definitely not least, we have the Engineer. It costs 4,500 gems to purchase and attacks using a nail gun. Then, once it has collected enough scrap, it builds sentries to help it defend. It costs 750 cash to place, DPS, so if you wait one wave, you can get it in the early game. At level 0, the Engineer deals 3.18 DPS and can place up to 1 sentry, which deals an additional 2.18 DPS. Despite having to tank the first wave, the Engineer does surprisingly well in the early game, defending until wave 7 in Fallen mode. That's really good, being as long as 3 Golden Scouts, which are often considered to be one of the best early game towers. The Engineer has a total of 6 levels, which means it works great throughout the entire game as you can gradually upgrade it. For example, level 3 is great in the mid game, with his rifle sentries being able to take down some pretty strong bosses. And once you max it out for 53,400 cash, it can deal some serious damage, with the Engineer itself dealing 91.19 DPS and his 4 War Machine sentries dealing 90.76 DPS each. That's a combined total of 453.87, which is just ridiculous. That's by far the highest DPS in the game, being 169.06 more than a max Accelerator. On top of this, the sentries at max level fire missiles, giving the Engineer some powerful crowd control, something that the Accelerator can't do. Also, after level 5, the sentries have the ability to attack hidden enemies, and the Engineer itself can attack lead, flying, and hidden enemies, giving the tower some pretty great coverage. With its total price of 53,400 cash, it has a value of 8.5 DPS per 1k spent, which is incredible, especially considering its high DPS. For reference, that's 63% more cost efficient than the Accelerator. The Engineer has a placement limit of 6, meaning the max DPS you can get using them is 2,723.22. That's a ton of damage, so the Engineer is amazing in the late game and can easily shred most bosses. And in addition to all of this, the sentries after level 4 get shields, which can completely negate an attack from enemies, making it pretty much stun immune as long as there isn't too many attacks. However, there are some pretty notable issues with the Engineer. First of all, because it has to collect a certain amount of scrap by dealing damage before it can place a sentry, if the Engineer isn't constantly attacking, its sentries can disappear, and when something enters its range, it won't have a chance to rebuild its sentries before the enemy passes by. But for the most part, this can be dealt with by just placing the Engineer at the front of the map, so it always gets to attack. A bigger problem is that despite its sentries having shields, they can die if attacked multiple times quickly. If the sentries are killed, the Engineer has to spend a while rebuilding them, resulting in a significant loss of DPS. So while the shields usually make it more reliable and stun immune, there are cases where it won't be so consistent. The most problematic issue though is the fact that the sentries can't be buffed by any support towers. So the Commander and Mercenary base barely boosts its DPS, with 6 Engineers within the range of these towers only gaining an extra 437.71 DPS for a total of 3,160.93. The thing is though, while this is bad, its competitor for strongest DPS tower, the Accelerator, isn't fully buffed either due to its overheating mechanic. 8 max Accelerators only gain 994.24 DPS for a total of 3,272.72 DPS. That's only slightly better than the Engineer, being 111.75 more potential DPS. You're hardly ever gonna notice that. Meanwhile, the Engineer can deal splash damage, ignore stuns, and has way better value. Because of that, the Engineer is currently the best tower for dealing high DPS, and in my opinion, ranks above the Accelerator in S+, and is the best out of all 4 hardcore towers. It has amazing value, great coverage, can be used the entire game, and just dishes out unmatched levels of DPS. But with that done, that's it for this video. As you can see, pretty much all the hardcore towers, except for the Necromancer, are amazing, so whichever one you get, you're gonna have some fun with them. But let me know in the comments down below what you think about this tier list and if you personally would change anything. And if you enjoyed, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to join the Blue Head Mafia. Also, if you want to talk to me, consider checking out my Discord. We got some pretty cool features, like a custom party finder bot that will automatically pair you up with other people who are trying to do the same strategy. There's a link to the server pinned in the comments. And finally, I want to give a huge shout out to these channel members for supporting my content. If you want to add me as a friend on Roblox or get early access to some of my videos, consider becoming a channel member. It helps me out a lot and I really appreciate it. Anyways, that's it for this video, and I'll see you guys in the next one.